Another little video blog about the word for word Bible comic. This is another one where it's just going to be audio only. I've been researching the Last Supper, and all four of the accounts have the Last Supper in it, and I've been looking at those and working out the order of the events, and it's actually really interesting when you do that and you see which things happen when. People have often asked me if my gospel comic whatever would include all the gospel and everything, and it won't. But what I have to do, although that might happen one day, what I have to do, even when I do them as they are, and each account has sort of most of the information, but not everything, is you still have to know all the information. You still have to know what's going on and what order it's in, because there's people in the picture who are doing things, and so they might be talking or not talking, or eating or not eating, or there or not there, and you have to work out at what stage of events things happen so that you can work out those things. So comparing all four, I use the chronological Bible. I've got a couple of different versions, so I've got people's differing opinions about it and how it works together. And one that I've been working with quite closely through the rest of it, I looked at it and I was like, I don't really think it works that well how they've put it together. And I looked at some others, and yeah, much more flows, and also seems to be all the actual verses are still in the right order. It's just that bits are kind of omitted from each one, as as each author stresses a different point, or remembers a different thing, or that sort of thing. So it's really interesting. So we've got the room which Jesus has set up, and there's the 12 of them there as it starts. And the first thing that happens, of course, is the washing of the feet. Now, one of the ones I looked at, I didn't have it right at the start, but it seems to be right at the start. It is the first event that happens, because let's have a look. So yeah, he washes the feet and he tells them about humility and that sort of thing. He also then says, he says an oblique thing which like refers to the fact that they're going to get betrayed, because he says, you're all cleansed now, but not all of you. And I know who I've chosen, and he's sort of implying, oh, not all of you, and the narration actually says, because he knew Judas would betray him and stuff. So he's like not directly confronting the betrayal at the moment, but he's saying, yes, you're all clean, not all of you. I know who I've chosen. And then he gives reference to the scripture where he says, he who shares my bread has lifted up his heel against me. And he says that's going to be fulfilled. And he says, yes, I'm telling you now before it happens. And you might think, oh, that's the point where he said he's going to get betrayed, but they don't. That's not the moment, because that's in John's account, and then in John's account, like a couple of verses down, that's when he properly says, one of you here is going to betray me, and then it sets that chain of events off, which is the same as all the others. So he says it directly, and then they all say, is it me, or what's happening, and they all confer with each other. So that's what happens. He says about the scripture, and then they sit down and start the meal off, and they haven't done all the bread and wine bit yet, which Jesus specifically does, but they may be engaging in the meal as it begins. So then, yeah, he drops the bomb. He says, one of you is going to betray me. That's in all of them. It's pretty much exactly the same. Three of the Gospels say that the disciples basically say, it's not I, is it? And some of them say they just confer amongst themselves. Others that they like shock, they don't say anything. They sort of they don't really say anything. Now that they say, so not Judas but the others, a lot of them say basically, is it I, and and then he says, the person who it is, it'd been better if they were never born. That's one of his statements that comes across in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And then he talks about in response to them saying, "Not is it I? Is it me? Is it me?" He says, "One of the people at the table." So Luke says he's got his hand on the table. He says he dips in the dish with me. It's one of the 12. These are the way that he describes it. So he says, yeah, like people who are here, it's one of you. Like he just reinforces, yeah, it's one of you. But he doesn't. I don't think with the reference to the dish at that point he explicitly says it's Judas, because some people think obviously maybe Judas at that moment is reaching into the dish and that identifies him, but he does that specifically in a moment, and then he goes on to say, like, it'd be better if the person who it is, by the way, it'd be better if they'd never been born. And then now Judas, as soon as after he said it better if they're never born, Judas then says, "It's not me, is it, Rabbi?" And then Jesus says, "You've said it," or "It's as you say," or however it's translated, that particular thing. It's translated in different ways, but basically saying, yeah, pretty much it's you. But he says it to him, and you think, well, why don't the others just dive in at that point? But they don't know. They don't know that he has said it to them, and so it's like, what? Why is it that they don't know? And when you're stacking these things in order, there's a verse which only comes up in Luke, and in a way you think, oh, that's troublesome. Like, when do they say this? And it says that the disciples start arguing about who's the greatest. And in Luke's account, it's basically straight after he says about, somebody's going to betray me, and they talk amongst themselves. Now, it seems logical and seems from the order of events from Luke that he says, like, one of you's going to betray me. Yes, it's one of you, one of the 12. And then they start saying, it's not me. But then the logical extension is that one of them must say, like, it's not, maybe it's that person. And they say, no, it couldn't be that person because he's too amazing. And no, he's the best of us. No, I'm the, and then they start arguing about it. But I think that gives the cover then for Judas to come in and say, is it me? And Jesus say, yeah, it is, and give him the sop of bread, and then say, what you're going to do it quickly. And because when it then says, so those are the events, and then it says, and then Jesus leaves, and it says of the other disciples that they didn't know that that's why he was leaving. So if you imagined a silent room where everybody's watching Judas getting handed a little sop of bread, and then Jesus basically saying, what you're going to do it quickly, and everything, and them all watching, they'd all know that he's the betrayer. But the next verse says they didn't know why he'd left, or they thought he'd gone to buy something or give money to the poor. So they just sort of assumed, oh yeah, Jesus sent him off to go and do something, and they probably had him say, what you're going to do, go and do it quickly. That's implied from the verse, but they don't know what they were just saying, and I think it's because they were in the midst of arguing with each other about who was the best. And John, I kind of missed a bit, but John, the Apostle John, says to Jesus, who is it? And then he is witness effectively to this sop of bread being handed to Judas. So he either knows, or it's recorded, he remembers afterwards that Jesus said, oh, I'm going to give somebody a sop of bread, and then perhaps he didn't think about it at the time, because he was arguing with the others, or he did, and he remembers, and he's the only one, and he records it in his gospel. So it's really interesting, because the main point is that verse, which is, by the way, Luke 22:24, they start arguing about who's the greatest. I think that is what covers when Judas says to Jesus, is it me? He basically says, you said it is, and then gives him the bit of bread, and then Judas goes out, and Jesus says, do it quickly. After that, Jesus says, stop arguing, like whoever's greatest among you needs to serve and all that. And then he says, other things, and also has the bread and the wine and all that. And that's all that happens once obviously Judas is already gone. And it's interesting because I actually thought perhaps, I was surprised when I read it through again to notice that even basically right at the start of the meal, he calls Judas out right at the start, and then they have the meal after that, and then he says all the stuff. Also, the Peter saying to Peter, "Oh, you deny me." That, I think, in like films and other adaptations, it looks like that happens when they're at the meal. And because in one of the accounts it kind of seems like that would be the case, because it runs straight on from stuff they're talking about the meal into Peter saying, because Jesus says, I'm going to go somewhere you can't go, and Peter says, well, why can't we go? And then he goes, oh, you can't go, and he says, I'll go anywhere, I'll die for you, and he says, oh, you'll betray me. And that apparently, when you put it alongside the others, happens outside. So they've finished their meal, they go outside, they say all this stuff, and this conversation happens outside because they've gone to the Mount of Olives, and that is provided by let's see, Mark 14:26 and Matthew 26:30, where it says they leave and then they go outside to the Mount of Olives, and then they have that conversation, which is in, again, pretty much all four. Putting those together, again, as just like the last video, I commend you, if you're going to study these things, get a chronological one or something like that, and just look at all those accounts side by side, and what's the same, what's slightly different, what's there, what's not, and try and figure out the order of events. It really makes it interesting to give that context, and also everything that's there. Now I'm going to go back to actually storyboarding it, putting the people in and knowing. And so in this case, like I say, as Judas is exposed effectively, the others will be in a sort of argument, and so you'll be able to see them in the pictures having a little argument. Check it out for yourself. I'll put some of the links below, and if you're not already, follow our Facebook page, the blog on our website, and also our Facebook group, which is a Word for Word Bible comic community. So check that out, and we hope to see you there. Cheers, bye.